Husband spat on his wife's face at their son's birthday party. 1 week later, the bank called him. Everything was in her name. It took Nadine 7 seconds to wipe her face clean. It took the bank 7 days to process the call her
Wonderful.
husband made
Thank
in a
you.
panic. The representative read the file back slowly. Primary trustee, sole equity holder, authorized signatory on every account. Marcus asked when this happened. The answer broke him. The Monday after his son's 5th birthday party, Marcus Atwell sat in the parking lot of a bank branch in Bowie, Maryland. The engine was running. The air conditioning was blowing directly into his face, but he had not adjusted it once in the 11 minutes since the call ended. His phone rested on his thigh, the screen still lit from the number he had just dialed. His hands were on the steering wheel, not gripping it, just resting there, like a man who had forgotten what he was supposed to do next. Inside that bank, a representative had read a file back to him. Every word landed with the precision of something rehearsed, though of course it was not rehearsed. It was simply a record. A series of legal entries, filing dates, notarized signatures, and amended authorizations that told a story Marcus had never bothered to read while it was being written right beneath his feet. His name was still on certain documents, but it no longer sat where it once did. The primary trustee line now belonged to someone else. The sole equity designation had been restructured. The authorized signatory field had been updated nearly a year ago, and the amendment that made it all possible had been filed using his own original signature as the enabling authority. He had signed the door open himself, and he never even knew there was a door. Nadine was not at the bank that morning. She was at home, in the kitchen, slicing strawberries for Elijah's lunchbox while the radio played low on the counter. She moved through the morning the way she always had, with a kind of unhurried order that most people mistook for passivity. She already knew what Marcus was sitting in that parking lot learning. She had known for close to a year, and she had chosen this morning's strawberries with the same calm precision she had chosen everything else. If you had driven past their house that Monday, you would have seen a yard still carrying traces of the weekend. Deflated balloons tied to the mailbox, a folded birthday banner leaning against the garage door, a stack of paper plates sitting in the recycling bin near the curb. It looked like the quiet aftermath of a good time. And for most of the 43 guests who had been there on Saturday, that was exactly what it had been. A child's birthday party, cake and music and cousins chasing each other around a bounce house. But something had happened in that backyard that no amount of cleaning up would undo. And the true weight of it had nothing to do with what people saw that afternoon. It had everything to do with what they had never been paying attention to. To understand how that Saturday came apart, you have to go back to the years before it. You have to see how the pieces were placed on the board, quietly, deliberately, with the kind of patience most people do not recognize until it has already finished its work. Marcus Atwell grew up in Prince George's County. His father, James, drove a bus for the metro system for 31 years and never once called in sick on a weekday. His mother, Lorraine Atwell, worked the front desk at a medical office in Landover for 26 years, answering phones, filing charts, and smiling at every patient who walked through the glass doors. But at home, Lorraine carried herself differently. She was a woman who believed deeply in appearances, in church attendance every Sunday without exception, and above all, in the unshakable idea that her only son had been anointed for something far greater than the life she and James had lived. She raised Marcus with a specific kind of confidence, not arrogance exactly, but a certainty that the world owed him something, and that it was only a matter of time before it delivered. She told him this at the dinner table. She told him this before school. She told it to other people's children when they came over to play. And by the time Marcus reached adulthood, that certainty had become so much a part of how he moved through the world that he no longer questioned whether it was earned. Marcus got his degree in business administration from Bowie State University. He was not the top of his class, but he was sharp enough, polished enough, and socially fluent enough to move through corporate rooms with a kind of ease that opened doors. He started as an operations analyst at a mid-sized logistics company outside of College Park. Within 4 years, he had been promoted twice. Within 7, he held the title of Vice President of Operations. Lorraine told every member of Greater Grace Community Church about the promotion before the ink on Marcus's new business cards had dried. She said it during announcements. She said it during potluck dinners. She said it to Pastor Coleman himself, who smiled and shook Marcus's hand the following Sunday with the kind of warmth that validated everything Lorraine had ever believed. Nadine Okafor entered the picture the way most important things do, without announcement and without fanfare. Her father, Emeka Okafor, had come to the United States from Nigeria in the early 1980s and settled in Silver Spring, Maryland. He worked in data systems for the county government and raised Nadine and her younger sister, Kioma, with a quiet firmness that valued preparation over performance and patience over speed. He was not a man who raised his voice. He was a man who raised his expectations and then waited without complaint to see them met. Nadine studied accounting at Howard University. She graduated with honors, though she never mentioned it, unless directly asked. She was not the loudest person in any room she entered, and Marcus liked that about her. When they first met at a homecoming tailgate, through a mutual friend named Terrence, Nadine was standing near the grill, holding a plate she had not yet eaten from, watching people with the kind of quiet attention that made you feel like she was taking notes no one would ever read. Their courtship followed a traditional path. Church approved, family vetted. Lorraine gave her blessing only after Nadine attended 3 consecutive Sunday dinners at the Atwell household and complimented Lorraine's pound cake with exactly the right amount of reverence. Not too much, which would have felt performative. Not too little, which would have been unforgivable. Nadine understood the calibration instinctively, and Lorraine took that understanding as proof that this girl knew her place. The wedding was held at Greater Grace. Pastor Coleman officiated. The reception had 200 guests, a DJ who played nothing recorded after 2005, and a photo booth that Lorraine had organized herself and positioned directly next to the head table. Marcus wore a navy suit. Nadine wore her grandmother's pearls. The photographs from that evening showed a couple that looked exactly the way everyone expected them to look. Whole, aligned, settled. The first year of marriage moved the way first years do when both people are still performing the best versions of themselves. Marcus brought flowers on Fridays. Nadine cooked dishes from her father's side of the family, jollof rice and pepper soup and fried plantain, and Marcus said he loved them even when she could tell he was still adjusting to the heat levels. They prayed together on Sunday nights. They disagreed about small things, whose turn it was to take the trash out, whether the thermostat should sit at 68 or 72. And they reconciled quickly, because neither of them yet had any reason to believe that reconciliation was anything but guaranteed. Lorraine visited often that first year. She brought foil-covered dishes and unsolicited opinions about the curtains, the furniture placement, and the way Nadine kept the guest bathroom. She never criticized directly. She simply offered alternatives, each one delivered with a smile and the unspoken implication that her way had been tested over decades and Nadine's had not. Marcus never noticed the pattern. He saw a loving mother. Nadine saw a woman mapping the interior of a house she intended to influence from the inside out. Elijah Marcus Atwell was born 2 years into the marriage. 7 pounds 4 ounces. Lorraine was in the delivery room, which Nadine had not requested, but did not protest. It was not, Nadine decided, the hill she needed to stand on. There would be other hills. She was right about that. After Elijah's birth, Nadine left her position at the accounting firm where she had been handling small business audits and tax filings. The family framed this as a sacrifice. Lorraine told the women at church that Nadine was doing the noble thing by stepping back to support her husband's career. What no one understood, and what Nadine never corrected, was that stepping away from the firm did not mean stepping away from the numbers. It meant she now had uninterrupted time to pay closer attention to every single one of them. Marcus's promotion to VP brought new money into the household. A bigger house in Bowie, 2 newer cars in the driveway, a backyard with enough space for a trampoline and a small vegetable garden that Nadine planted along the fence line the first spring after they moved in. From the outside, the Atwell family looked like a textbook success story, written in neat, predictable paragraphs that anyone could admire. But there was one detail, buried in the foundation, that almost no one noticed. When Marcus incorporated a side consulting LLC to take on freelance logistics contracts, it was Nadine who helped him file the paperwork. She researched the structure. She drafted the initial operating agreement. She was listed as the registered agent, and at her suggestion, she was also named as co-managing member. Marcus signed the agreement on a Tuesday night at the kitchen table without reading the full clause structure. He flipped to the signature page, asked Nadine if everything looked right, and signed where she pointed. He thought it was administrative. He trusted her enough not to look more closely, and at the time, the trust was not misplaced. It was simply incomplete, because trust without attention is not trust, it is assumption, and assumptions, unlike contracts, do not hold up when the ground starts to shift. The house deed carried both their names. The joint savings account received deposits from both their incomes, and every Sunday Nadine sat on the finance committee at Greater Grace, while Marcus stood proudly on the usher board. Everyone saw what they expected to see: a man building a legacy, a woman supporting it from the side, a mother-in-law overseeing the entire operation with the satisfied certainty of someone who had predicted this outcome from the beginning. Nobody thought to ask who was actually reading the paperwork. The shift did not arrive with a single dramatic moment. It crept forward the way most damage does, through a series of small decisions that no one challenged, because no one believed they mattered enough to question. Marcus stopped consulting Nadine about money. Not all at once. It happened gradually, the way a person stops calling someone by their full name and starts shortening it without noticing. He opened a separate savings account and told her it was for business expenses. He did not share the login. He did not mention the balance. Nadine noticed, because Nadine noticed everything that involved numbers. She did not say a word. She simply recorded the date of the first deposit and moved on. Lorraine's visits grew longer. What had once been Sunday dinners became full weekend stays. What had been weekend stays started stretching into entire weeks. She rearranged the kitchen shelves. She reorganized the pantry. She commented on what Elijah was eating, how Nadine dressed him for daycare, whether Nadine was reading to him enough at bedtime. Every remark was wrapped carefully in the language of concern, the tone of a grandmother who simply cared too much. But the cumulative weight of it was something else entirely. It was territory, and every observation was delivered within earshot of Marcus, who never once said a word to correct it. There was one dinner that stayed with Nadine, longer than the others. Lorraine had made oxtails, a dish she prepared only for special occasions, and she served Marcus first, then herself, then Elijah. Nadine received her plate last, handed to her across the table, without eye contact. It was not a large gesture. It was not something you could point to in a conversation and say, "That was the moment." But it was the kind of gesture that tells a woman exactly where she ranks in a room full of people who are supposed to be her family. Then Simone Ferris appeared. She entered Marcus's life gradually, the way certain people do when they are being introduced with intention but disguised as coincidence. Simone worked in corporate development at a competing logistics firm. She was sharp, well-dressed, and strategically warm in a way that made every interaction feel like it had been lightly rehearsed. Marcus told Nadine that Simone was helping him land a significant new consulting contract. A partnership, he called it. An opportunity. The explanation sounded professional. The frequency of their dinners and phone calls did not. Nadine found a receipt in the pocket of a jacket Marcus left draped over the back of a kitchen chair. 2 entrees at a restaurant in DuPont Circle she had never been to. 1 appetizer, a bottle of wine that cost more than their weekly grocery run. She stood at the counter and looked at that receipt for a long time. She did not feel the sharp cinematic sting of betrayal the way it happens in movies. What she felt was colder. It was recognition. The slow, settling awareness that the life she had been maintaining with such precision was being lived in 2 directions, and she was only being shown one of them. She did not confront him. She did not leave the receipt on the counter where he could see it and feel the weight of accusation. She photographed it with her phone, saved the image in a folder she had labeled Elijah, School Docs, and slid the receipt back into the jacket pocket. Then she hung the jacket in the closet, washed her hands, and started dinner. She made Marcus's plate first. She set it at his usual place.
Would not be reactive. It would not be reactive. It would be structural. She did not yet know exactly what that move would look like, but she knew it would be built on paper, not on pain. At a family barbecue that June, Lorraine introduced Simone to a group of relatives standing near the cooler. She called her Marcus's business partner. She said it casually, naturally, the way you introduce someone whose position in the family has already been decided without a vote. Nadine was standing 6 feet away, holding a plate of potato salad she had woken up early that morning to make. Not one person in that circle turned to include her in the conversation. Not one person seemed to notice she was there at all. Marcus began making decisions about the LLC without telling Nadine. He signed a retainer agreement with a new client, a regional distribution company worth $12,400 a month. He did not mention it over dinner. He did not bring it up on the weekend. But because the LLC's operating account had been opened under Nadine's registered agency, every deposit, every contractual amendment, and every new signatory request still flowed through channels she had access to. Marcus had never thought to change those defaults. The truth was, he had never thought about them at all. The fracture came on a Tuesday evening in mid-October. Elijah had a fever of 102. Nadine called Marcus at 7. He said he was at a client dinner and would be home within the hour. He walked through the front door at 10:15. The house was dark. Elijah was asleep upstairs, his fever broken since 9. Nadine was sitting in the living room with no lights on and no television playing. She did not ask where he had been. She did not accuse him of anything. She said, "Elijah's fever broke around 9. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, looked at her as though he wanted to say something, and then walked upstairs without a word. That night, after Marcus was asleep and the house had gone completely still, Nadine opened her laptop at the kitchen table. She pulled up every financial document tied to their marriage, the LLC filings, the mortgage records, the bank statements, the investment accounts. She cross-referenced dates. She compared signatures. She read every clause she had written and every amendment she had filed. She worked until 2 in the morning, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen, her expression unchanged from the moment she had sat down. She was not crying, she was not shaking, she was reading, and she was building something that no one in that house, or that church, or that family would see coming until it was already finished. Nadine's process was not emotional, it was architectural. Her accounting training had taught her that every financial structure has a logic to it, and that logic can be traced, mapped, and when necessary, redirected, if you understand where the load-bearing walls actually are. She started with the LLC operating agreement. She read it the way she had written it, clause by clause, subsection by subsection. The critical provision was in Section 4, Paragraph B. As co-managing member, Nadine held equal authority over all financial and operational decisions. The agreement further stated that either managing member could execute administrative amendments, including changes to signatory designations, trust allocations, and fiduciary assignments, without requiring the consent of the other member, provided the amendment did not alter the equity split by more than 49%.
Marcus had signed that provision. He had signed it on a Tuesday night at the kitchen table, between bites of leftover chicken, without reading beyond the first page. Nadine pulled the deed to the house. Both names. She checked the mortgage. She reviewed the brokerage account Marcus had opened under the preteens of starting Elijah's college fund. It was in Marcus's name alone, but the initial deposit of $22,000 had come directly from their joint savings account. Nadine screenshotted each document, cross-referenced each date, and organized everything into a folder on her desktop that she encrypted with a password only she knew. 2 weeks later, she sat across from attorney Denise Warfield in a small, warmly lit office in Upper Marlborough. Denise had been practicing family law and asset protection for 19 years. She was meticulous, direct, and known within certain circles in Prince George's County as the kind of attorney who did not waste time with sympathy when clarity was what her clients actually needed. Nadine had found her through the same professional network that connected members of Greater Grace. Though the two women had never spoken before that first appointment, Nadine laid the documents on the desk in order. The LLC operating agreement, the filed articles of organization, the property deed, the joint account records, the brokerage statements, the receipt photographs. She did not narrate. She did not editorialize. She did not cry or raise her voice or ask Denise whether what Marcus had done was fair. She simply placed each document on the desk, the way a surgeon lays out instruments before an operation, and said, "I need you to tell me what I am legally entitled to do, and I need you to be specific." Denise studied the materials across 2 separate meetings, each lasting over an hour. She made notes in a yellow legal pad and asked Nadine clarifying questions about the timeline of deposits, the sequence of contract signings, and the circumstances under which the LLC had been originally incorporated. On the second visit, she closed the folder, removed her reading glasses, and delivered her assessment with the kind of plain language that left no room for ambiguity. Nadine had co-managing authority over the LLC and all associated revenue. The marital home was jointly held. The brokerage account, funded entirely from joint assets, was legally contestable, and every consulting contract Marcus had signed carried Nadine's registered agency, meaning she bore signatory exposure, but also held signatory power that had never been revoked. Nadine asked one question. If I restructure the trust allocation and redesignate myself as primary trustee on the operating accounts, what does that require? Denise explained that it required a single filing, a notarized amendment, and the legal foundation already provided by Marcus's original signature on the operating agreement, which granted Nadine unilateral administrative authority for exactly this kind of change. Nadine filed the amendment within the month. She did not rush. She never rushed. Over the following 3 months, she restructured the trust so that her name appeared as primary trustee and sole authorized signatory on every operating account tied to the LLC. She transferred the brokerage account into a custodial trust for Elijah, naming herself as fiduciary. Each step was legal. Each step was documented. Each step was filed while Marcus was chasing new contracts, dining with Simone, and assuming that the life he believed he had built was still standing exactly the way he had left it. Nadine told no one. Not Emeka, not Kioma, not Denise beyond the scope of their professional relationship, not the women on the finance committee. She moved in silence because silence, in her experience, was the only language that could not be argued with, interrupted, or reframed by someone who believed they knew better. Elijah's 5th birthday party fell on the last Saturday of September. The backyard was decorated with blue and white balloons, a rented bounce house anchored near the fence, and a long folding table covered in a tablecloth printed with cartoon race cars. Nadine had ordered the cake from a bakery in Mitchellville. 3 layers, vanilla with buttercream frosting. Elijah's name written in blue across the top, slightly off-center, which made it look more handmade than it was. 43 people came. aunts and uncles from both sides, members of Greater Grace, neighbors from the cul-de-sac, a handful of Marcus's colleagues, including a junior associate who had driven down from Baltimore specifically because Marcus had promised to introduce him to a potential client. Lorraine arrived early, as she always did, and immediately began adjusting the serving table Nadine had already arranged. She moved the napkins to the left. She repositioned the plastic cups. She told a cousin that the balloon arch was a little thin on one side, though no one else had noticed. Marcus was distracted the entire afternoon. He shook hands and smiled and bounced Elijah on his hip for photographs, but his eyes kept returning to his phone. Something at work had come loose. A compliance review had been opened on one of his largest consulting contracts, and the issue cantered on a discrepancy in the LLC's signatory structure. Someone in the client's legal department had flagged an authorization chain that did not match what Marcus had originally submitted. He did not yet understand why the records looked different. He did not yet know that they had been legally amended 11 months earlier. Midway through the party, just after the candles on the cake had been blown out and slices were being passed around on paper plates, Marcus pulled Nadine aside near the garage. The spot was partially blocked from view by the bounce house, but at least 15 guests were within clear sightline from the patio. His voice was low but hard. His shoulders were tight. He accused her of going behind his back. He said something was wrong with the business accounts. He said he knew she had been tampering with things she did not understand. Nadine stood still. She did not step back. She did not cross her arms. She looked at him directly and said, calmly and without inflection, "I have only ever managed what was already mine to manage." Something behind Marcus's eyes shifted. It was not anger exactly, though anger was part of it. It was the particular kind of collapse that happens when a man realizes the ground beneath him is not as solid as he believed, and instead of examining the foundation, he blames the person standing closest. He spat in her face. It landed just below her left eye. There was no sound effect. There was no gasp from the crowd. There was only stillness. The kind of stillness that settles over a group of people who have just witnessed something they cannot take back and do not know how to address. Children were still playing inside the bounce house. The music was still playing from the portable speaker near the back door, but every adult within range had stopped moving. Nadine blinked once. She reached slowly for a napkin from the table beside her. She wiped her face with the same measured steadiness she brought to everything she touched, starting just below her eye and moving downward to her chin. She folded the napkin once, then again until it was a small, neat square. She placed it on the table beside a stack of unused birthday plates. She did not look around at the faces watching her. She did not search for sympathy or solidarity. She looked at Marcus, and her expression was not one of anger or hurt. It was the expression of a woman confirming something she had already decided was true. Then she turned and walked into the house through the back door, letting the screen close softly behind her. Inside, she stood at the kitchen sink for a moment, her hands resting on the counter. She could hear Elijah laughing somewhere in the front of the house, playing with his cousin, unaware of what had just happened in the yard that held his birthday decorations. She turned on the faucet, washed her face with cool water, and dried it with a dish towel. She folded the towel and placed it on the counter. Then she took a breath and went to find her son. The party dissolved in quiet stages. People gathered their children and left in clusters, murmuring to one another in the driveway and across the hoods of parked cars. Lorraine tried to smooth the moment over. She told anyone still lingering that Marcus was under tremendous stress, that work had been difficult, that all marriages go through seasons. But the faces around her were closed. Nobody argued. Nobody agreed. They simply left. Pastor Coleman, who had been standing near the dessert table when it happened, did not approach Marcus. He did not offer comfort or scripture. He walked to his car, sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel, and stayed there for a very long time, before finally pulling out of the cul-de-sac. The following Monday morning, Marcus called the bank. He had spent the entire weekend in a state of mounting unease, sitting at the desk in the home office, trying to access the LLC's operating account online. His login credentials still worked, but something had changed. His permissions had been quietly downgraded. He could view account statements. He could see the balance, but he could not authorize transfers. He could not approve vendor payments. He could not sign any new documentation. Every action he attempted was met with the same message. Authorization level insufficient. Please contact your account administrator. He assumed it was a technical error. He called the bank's business services line on Monday morning, sitting in the parking lot because he did not want to make the call inside the house where Nadine might hear him. The representative was polite and thorough. She pulled up the account file, verified Marcus's identity with 3 security questions, and then began reading the current account structure back to him in a tone that carried no emotion whatsoever. Primary trustee on the account, Nadine Okafor Atwell. Sole equity holder of the LLC, Nadine Okafor Atwell. Authorized signatory on all operating and fiduciary accounts, Nadine Okafor Atwell. Marcus asked her to repeat it. She did, word for word, with the same measured patience of someone reading from a document that had been finalized a long time ago. He asked when this had been changed. The representative reviewed the amendment filing date and told him, 11 months ago. 11 months, nearly a full calendar year. Every dinner Marcus had shared with Simone, every contract he had signed with a handshake and a smile, every meeting where he had introduced himself as the principal of the consulting firm, all of it had taken place inside a structure that Nadine had already legally, methodically, and irreversibly rewritten underneath him. He had been walking through rooms that no longer belonged to him, shaking hands on behalf of an entity he no longer controlled, and living in a house where the most important document in the filing cabinet carried a signature that had already been superseded by someone who had been sitting across from him at breakfast every single morning. He called Nadine from the bank parking lot. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was even. There was no triumph in it, no bitterness, no performance. She said, "Everything is exactly where it is supposed to be, Marcus. It has been for a while." Then the line was quiet for a long moment, and she hung up. Marcus retained his own attorney within the week. The consultation took place in a conference room in Largo. His attorney reviewed every document, the original operating agreement, the filed amendment, the trust restructuring, the custodial transfer, the signatory redesignation. He spent nearly 2 hours on the paperwork before looking at Marcus and delivering his assessment in plain language. Every action Nadine had taken was within her legal authority as co-managing member. The original operating agreement, which Marcus had signed, explicitly granted her administrative power to amend trust allocations, signatory designations, and fiduciary assignments without requiring secondary consent. There was no fraud. There was no forgery. There was no theft. There was only a woman who understood the legal architecture of their shared financial life with a precision that her husband had never come close to matching. The consulting contract that had been flagged for compliance review was formally paused. The client's attorneys, uncomfortable with the signatory discrepancy now embedded in the LLC's public filings, withdrew the retainer. $12,400 a month disappeared in the time it took to send a single email. Simone Farris stopped returning calls. The professional alliance that had once felt so full of momentum evaporated the instant it became clear that Marcus did not control what he had always represented himself as controlling. Simone understood leverage better than most, and she knew when a position had already been closed. 3 weeks after the birthday party, Lorraine called Nadine on a Wednesday evening. Her tone carried its usual authority, but something underneath it had shifted, something quieter and less certain. She spoke about family, about resilience, about how marriages survive difficult chapters if both people are willing to sit down and talk. Nadine listened without interrupting, When Lorraine finished, Nadine said, "Miss Lorraine, I have always respected you, but this is between me and the man I married, and right now the only thing I need to focus on is making sure my son is taken care of." The silence, on Lorraine's end, lasted longer than any pause Nadine had ever heard from her. Then the call ended. The church community did what church communities do. It shifted without announcing that it was shifting. Marcus was not asked to leave Greater Grace. No one told him he was unwelcome. But the warmth that had once surrounded him cooled by degrees. Handshakes after service became briefer. Conversations in the parking lot thinned. He was quietly removed from the usher board rotation for special services. Pastor Coleman requested a private meeting and spoke with the kind of directness that left no room for deflection. "A man who spits on his wife in front of the people who love them both," he said, "has already lost something he may never recover." Marcus moved into a short-term rental in Laurel. The apartment was a one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a complex near the parkway, the kind of place that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and came with blinds that did not close all the way. He brought 2 suitcases and a box of files he had spent the previous weekend gathering from the home office. Files that, he was beginning to realize, documented a structure that no longer answered to him. The separation was not theatrical. There were no shouting matches in the driveway, no boxes thrown across the lawn, no neighbors peering through curtains at a spectacle. There were only documents filed efficiently, signed where required, and processed through legal channels that Nadine understood better than anyone else in the family. The house in Bowie, jointly owned but now occupied solely by Nadine and Elijah, remained as it was. The trampoline stayed in the backyard. The garden along the fence line kept growing. Elijah asked about his father on the 3rd night, and Nadine told him that Daddy was staying somewhere else for a while, but that he loved Elijah very much. She said it calmly, without bitterness, because she understood that whatever had broken between her and Marcus did not belong to their son. Over the months that followed, Marcus's professional reputation shifted in ways that were difficult to trace, but impossible to deny. He was no longer invited to the industry dinners he had once attended without question. Colleagues who had once returned his calls within the hour began letting them ring through to voicemail. The junior associate from Baltimore who had attended Elijah's birthday party stopped reaching out entirely. His standing did not collapse in one visible, dramatic moment. It eroded slowly, steadily, the way a shoreline pulls back after years of quiet pressure from a current no one can see, until the ground you once stood on is simply no longer there. And you cannot remember the exact day it disappeared. 6 months after the birthday party, on a Saturday morning in early spring, Nadine was in the backyard with Elijah. He was learning to ride his bicycle without training wheels. The same yard, the same fence, the same grass where balloons had once been tied to folding chairs and a man had lost control of something he never fully held. Elijah wobbled, caught himself, and pedaled 3 full rotations without falling. He looked back at his mother with the kind of unfiltered, wide-open joy that only a 5-year-old can produce, and Nadine clapped twice and told him she was proud. Her father, Emeka, had driven down from Silver Spring. He sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and watched his grandson ride in wide, unsteady loops across the lawn. He did not ask about Marcus. He did not ask about the business or the legal filings. He had never been a man who pressed for information that was not freely offered. After a long, comfortable silence, he said, "You were always the one who read the fine print, Nadine, even as a child." She smiled. Not widely, just enough. Nadine had assumed full operational control of the consulting LLC. She restructured the client base, renegotiated 2 contracts that had been underperforming under Marcus's management, and terminated a 3rd that had been generating revenue on paper, but costing more in administrative overhead than it was worth. She brought in a junior consultant named Terrence Hayes. a young man she had been mentoring through the church's Young Professionals Development Program. Terence was sharp, hungry, and grateful for the opportunity, in a way that reminded Nadine of herself at 24. She trained him the way her father had trained her, with high expectations, clear instructions, and the quiet confidence that he would rise to meet them. Within 4 months, the business was generating more revenue per quarter than it had at any point under Marcus's leadership. Not because Nadine was louder, or more aggressive, or more visible. Because she was more precise. She understood that a business, like patience, rewards the people who pay attention to the parts no one else is willing to read. She did not speak publicly about what had happened. She did not post on social media. She did not give explanations to curious neighbors or distant relatives who called with transparent questions. When women at church approached her with quiet admiration and said they respected what she had done, she accepted their kindness, without performance, and changed the subject to their children or the upcoming fellowship brunch. She thought sometimes about the years of silence, the Sunday dinners where she cleared plates while other people received praise for the life she had helped build. The barbecue where Simone was introduced as a partner and nobody in that circle turned to check whether Nadine was still standing there with a plate in her hand. The Tuesday night when she sat in a dark living room with no lights and no sound, waiting for a man who had already left in every way that mattered except physically. She thought about the way Lorraine had handed her that plate of oxtails last, without eye contact, as if Nadine were a guest in her own home. She thought about the receipt in the jacket pocket and the careful, deliberate way she had photographed it and put it back. She thought about all the moments she could have spoken, but chose instead to listen, to watch, to document, to prepare. She did not regret the patience. She regretted that the patience had been necessary at all. She wished she had married a man who read the documents he signed. She wished she had joined a family where her silence was understood as strength rather than submission. But wishes were not currency, and Nadine had learned early that the only things worth counting were the things written on paper, with a signature and a date. Some women burn the house down when they have had enough. Nadine read the deed first. She checked every clause. She filed every amendment. And when the moment came, when the spit landed on her cheek in front of every person who had ever underestimated her, she already knew the truth. The house was hers. The business was hers. The future was hers. Not because she took anything, because she had built the floor everyone else was standing on, and not one of them had ever thought to look down and check whose name was written on the foundation. Dignity does not always look like strength in the moment it is tested. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a woman wiping her face with a paper napkin and walking inside without a single word. But dignity remembers. And when it finally moves, it moves with paperwork, with filed amendments, with notarized signatures, and with the quiet, immovable certainty of someone who understood the architecture long before the walls began to fall. If this story made you think about the power of patience and preparation, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you in the next one.